Empire, for instance, and even today, there is a chief rabbi of Britain and 2 chief rabbis in Israel. But ever since the Jews first started to leave the Middle East and spread and scatter all over the world centuries ago, no one Jewish leader or council has ever been able to assert universal control over the Jewish faith. Now, that said, a big part of traditional Jewish belief is faith that one day God will, in fact, send someone to serve as the leader of all Judaism, a Jewish Messiah who will rebuild the temple, rule as a king, and herald the beginning of some new divine world order. And over the years, some sects of fundamentalist Jews have rallied around a person who they are convinced is this Messiah. The most famous example would be the so-called Lubavitchers, who said that a New York rabbi named Menachem Mendel Schneerson was the Messiah. Rabbi Schneerson was a pretty major figure in the world of ultra-Orthodox Judaism in the 1980s and 90s, and was the center of a pretty extensive personality cult among fundamentalist Jews all around the world. He died childless in 1994, but many of his fundamentalist followers believe that this was only temporary, and he will be back soon enough.
The rabbi is going to rise up in his grave and come back to life?
Absolutely. A physical resurrection when he's going to come back in his full glory imminently and redeem the entire world.
In fundamentalist Jewish communities in America and Israel, you often see big pictures of him all over the place and portraits of him in homes. I remember when I was in Israel, before I learned about all of this, I figured that he must be a politician or something because of how often you would see posters of him on buildings or along the side of the road. Now, the Christians, of course, believe that their Messiah has already come, and their first churches were initially based on a notion of inherited authority from Christ himself. During his life, Jesus handpicked 12 apostles. They all outlived him, and after his death, several of them would go on to spread Christianity across the Roman Empire. The first major Christian churches in ancient cities like Alexandria and Antioch were part of what we would now call Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And the men who would proceed to head those churches would be called the patriarchs, who would claim to be the successor to whatever apostle started that church. Today, of course, there are Eastern Orthodox churches in countries all over the place, but all trace their spiritual authority back to one of the original churches started by one of the apostles. The different geographic branches of Orthodox Christianity, which are known as autocephalies, are all independent from one another. And within an autocephaly, all bishops are technically regarded as being equal, with the bishop who serves as patriarch merely being recognized as a symbolic first among equals. Though in practice, patriarch power does vary from place to place. I hear the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church is quite a big deal. The patriarch of the tiny Orthodox Church of Constantinople, is likewise supposed to be considered the first among equals among all of the patriarchs. This is because of Constantinople's historic status as the capital of the Christianized phase of the Roman Empire. But again, it is mostly a symbolic thing. Now, one of the other ancient apostle-founded Christian churches, the one in Rome, has always been special. It was started by the Apostle Peter, who many believe was the most important one. As a result, followers of the Church of Rome have always believed that their church was given a unique godly authority. And of course, this kicked off what we now know to be the Roman Catholic Church. Catholic in this sense meaning like universal. The head of the Catholic Church is the Pope, who claims to be the modern-day successor to Peter. To this day, Catholics will talk about Pope Francis sitting on the throne of St. Peter. And unlike Orthodox Christianity, which as we've said has a relatively loose organization and weak hierarchy, the Catholic Church has an extremely rigid hierarchy. Today, all Catholics all over the world all recognize the Pope as the supreme leader of their faith, both in terms of his ability to decide official church doctrine and his ability to appoint all of the highest ranking church officials, who in turn appoint the lower ranking ones, and so on. You will always see a big photo of the Pope in a Catholic church, and it is not unusual for individual Catholics to own little things with pictures of his face on them too, like lockets and candles and statues and that sort of thing. After several centuries of power struggles between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches, By the 9th century, the Catholic Church had unquestionably emerged as the most powerful Christian denomination in the entire world, and the Pope had become one of the most powerful people on the planet. But eventually, there came a severe backlash. The so-called Protestant Reformation of the 16th century triggered a new Christian tradition that very much continues to this day, which is people setting up new, independent Christian churches that completely reject the Pope's authority. Indeed, many of these new Protestant churches now explicitly hold the rejection of any sort of overly strict church hierarchy to be one of the central doctrines of their faith. Today, many of the major Protestant denominations, like the Baptists, the Methodists, the Pentecostals, and the Presbyterians, only have very loose, leaderless organizations tying their various churches together. Instead, the individual churches largely just practice their particular flavor of Christianity in the way that they feel is right. Now, there are a couple of examples of non-Catholic Christian churches that have gone way in a different direction and in fact embraced a very, very rigid hierarchy. The first would be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, better known as the Mormons. The Mormons believe that an American man named Joseph Smith was summoned by God to establish and run a new Christian church in the mid-19th century. Joseph was thus recognized by the early Mormons as being both the president of their church and a prophet of God. And since his death, the Mormons believe that God has always provided them with a new prophet to also serve as church president. The current president/prophet is this guy, Russell M. Nelson. It is a very unique position, and you notice that even in the way that Mormons talk about it. They always refer to the head of their church as the prophet in the abstract, but when they mention him by name, it is always President Nelson. Knowing and caring about the prophet is considered very important in Mormon culture, and Mormon families will often have a picture of him in their home somewhere. When I was in Utah a few years ago, I bought this little bookmark, which you can see has a chronology of all of the prophets, from President Smith to President Monson, who was still in charge at the time. The prophet is an extremely powerful man who not only appoints the top people in the LDS Church, but the Mormons believe also has the capacity to receive brand new Christian revelation directly from God. And unlike the Pope, who is elected by the top Catholic clergy, the Mormon prophet just inherits the job automatically when the old prophet dies, based on his seniority in the church hierarchy. The other example of an ultra-hierarchical Christian church would be the Jehovah's Witnesses, although their case is quite unique as well. The Jehovah's Witnesses were founded by a guy called Charles Taze Russell in the mid-19th century. He didn't consider himself a literal prophet, but he did believe that he had cracked the code of the Bible in such a way as to give him unique access to God's intentions, and particularly God's prophecies for the future. Russell founded a magazine called Watchtower that the Jehovah's Witnesses believe to this day communicates God's instructions. After Russell died, the Jehovah's Witnesses, or more specifically the Watchtower Publishing Society, had two very powerful presidents that anyone would have recognized as being the head of their particular faith. But around the 1970s, the Jehovah's Witnesses significantly reformed their internal operations and greatly lessened the powers of their president in favor of a more collective leadership system. Today, supreme authority over the Jehovah's Witnesses, including the writing and publishing of the Watchtower, is held by a council of 8 men known as the governing body. Part of this has to do with the fact that the Jehovah's Witnesses are very puritanical and dislike anything that is seen as being too worldly or idolatrous. So caring too much about the church leadership or forming any sort of personality cult around the church president is something to be discouraged. You can't even find individual photographs or biographies of the members of the governing body on the Jehovah's Witnesses official website. All right, now are we ready for Islam? The founder of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, lived quite a productive life as far as founders of religion go. He not only lived long enough to see his religion spread quite substantially across the region where he lived, but was also able to become ruler of his own religious state, located here in modern-day Saudi Arabia. When Muhammad died in 632 AD, some of his followers got together and appointed a guy named Abu Bakr to replace him. He was given the title of Caliph, which literally means successor. Abu Bakr was then followed by Umar, who was followed by Uthman, who was followed by Ali. But Ali was a very divisive leader, And when he was killed in 661, the dream of an Islam led by a single, universally agreed upon leader died with him. After Ali's death, a powerful Muslim military leader named Muawiyah, who had battled against Ali during his life, proclaimed himself to be the new caliph.